May our gathering and the mingling of our waters be an expression of the connections we share with one another, the choice we made to be here this morning as part of this community, and for those of you who are members and friends, to be part of this community. You see, there is an importance that we all feel in sharing our lives with one another. May our gathering and the mingling of our waters be a blessing to this congregation and to all those who are gathered, and to the beginning of our church year. Now, I invite you to take a portion of your mingled waters and put them in a small container as a physical representation of your connection to this community. And then return the rest of the water, this sacred water, to the earth as a symbol of our connection to Mother Earth and with all living things. Water binds us to each other and to all living things. Our blending of waters is a beautiful and mysterious thing because, of course, it is more than our waters that we are blending. What is it to be part of a faith community? To commit some of your time, your energy, your resources to sustain a space for you and anyone who chooses a place where we can affirm and promote shared values, a reverence for life, an affirmation of everyone's worth and importance, an aspiration of a more just, equitable, peaceful, and compassionate world. We are not unlike the women in the story earlier who came from the four directions. As we gather here, we come together from different places, different beliefs, different cultures, with different needs and different expectations. We gather with one another to express joy and happiness, to manage change and transition, to embrace grief and loss, and to take time to rest and for renewal with one another. There have been many waters shared in this space. Tears of joy and sadness, sweat in working for justice, mist from our voices and laughter. Our community mingles together in a unique harmony and is blessed by all of you through your reverence and love for each other and for all life. This space is but an empty vessel filled by your lives and compassion for one another. However, there is a wall between us right now, making it much more challenging to experience all these things. I hope this water communion and having some of our communal water with you may provide some feeling of connection to this community, some physical manifestation of what this community offers you, despite the fact that we are unable to be with one another face to face. I know Zoom and YouTube provide us a semblance of connection, a voice and an image, but there is something missing. So I've been thinking about how can we feel more connected across these electrical lines and computer screens. Even after 6 months, this type of connection is still not enough. Many of us feel exhausted rather than enriched and renewed after so much time on Zoom and YouTube. Even when seeing the images of people that we love and care about and hearing their voices. And I wonder, why is that? When we are physically together, we can touch each other, and I know that is missing. But I think there's something more draining, something that is draining us more than just not being able to touch. Psychiatrist Gianpiero Pellettieri has some thoughts about why we are not renewed, but instead exhausted by Zoom connections. She writes, "Our minds are together when our bodies feel we are not. That dissonance, which causes people to have conflicting feelings, is exhausting. You cannot relax into the conversation naturally. Our brains seem to function better face to face. So says Julia Schuyler in her article from National Geographic called Zoom Fatigue. She writes, "A typical Zoom video call impairs ingrained abilities and requires sustained and intense attention to words instead." She goes on to talk about how we're accustomed to picking up on messages that a person that's across from us is sending with their bodies, which give us clues as to their comfort level, the direction and intensity of their focus, and whether they're preparing to speak. So instead of deriving comfort from familiar connections face to face, Schuyler says the brain becomes overwhelmed by unfamiliar excess stimuli while being hyper-focused on searching for nonverbal cues that it just can't find. And how many of you look at yourself on a Zoom call? I know I do. Checking out if my head is in the right place, checking for if there's anything in my teeth, be sure my hair is combed right. Did I pick the right shirt for the Zoom call? It's exhausting. It's more like a performance than a meaningful conversation between two people. And looking at yourself keeps you from really attending to the conversation you're in. And don't get me started on how being in a Zoom meeting with a large group of people is cumbersome and awkward and lacks anything close to intimacy. If someone doesn't facilitate who talks and who doesn't, it descends into chaos and cutting each other off, and a reverb that just takes over everything. And of course, talking on Zoom reminds me of what I don't have: live, face-to-face connection. So how do we find comfort? The comfort we have in a face-to-face interaction, proximity to one another, this proximity that we crave, the connection we need, the intimacy and familiarity and understanding that can develop between people when they're face-to-face. Let's look at what human interaction is. You see, I think of it as a ritual, a series of actions performed according to a prescribed order. Usually this held in some reverence. We give our attention and fullness of being to the ritual. And if we see social interaction as a ritual, we might think more intently on how we want the ritual to proceed and what meaning we ascribe to it. And we might be likely to view it as more than just exchanging information over. Far from being an empty ritual, mindful interactions can provide, even over the internet, can provide comfort, connection, and intimacy. We attend to the emotions that precede and follow ritual behavior to experience what we learn, what change happens. And we're more likely, if we think of it as a ritual, to notice how this ritual influences our decisions, our worldview, our sense of self, and personal growth. So how do we create rituals that might aid us in getting more renewal and sustenance and connections from our interaction over the internet? Here's some mindful practices I'm starting. I'm going to stop looking at myself while I'm talking to somebody on Zoom. I'd prefer to turn off my self-view altogether, but then other people couldn't see me. But I am going to resist the urge to treat Zoom as a perverse little mirror and start focusing my attention on the person I'm talking to. Even in a crowd of people, I think what I'll do is I'll set up the speaker view so that I only talk to the person who's talking. That may not be perfect, but generally, if I can see the person talking as the dominant image, I will give them my attention. I know that many of you, when you get on a Zoom call and you haven't seen people for a long time, you want to look at everybody. And maybe initially that's fine. You say hi, all that. But let's think about this. If you were sitting at a table during coffee hour and continuously looking at everyone while you were talking to one person, wouldn't that seem odd? Wouldn't that be exhausting? It just wouldn't be natural. One more thing that makes Zoom difficult for me is that I tend to lean into the screen, looking at someone as if they're right up in my face, inches away. That's not normal either. We all need our personal space. If we're face to face, we would be able to tell our personal space. So I've decided that I'm going to sit back in my chair rather than put my face right up to the screen so I can see other people's faces right up to their screen. I think it's easier for the person I'm talking with if I'm not right up in their face and they're not right up in mine. And by sitting back, maybe I can model a different way of being on Zoom together. A way that feels more relaxed, like a real conversation. You know, I'm really trying to reframe Zoom as a mindfulness practice. And so I take a deep breath before I get on to a Zoom call, centering myself, calming myself. I affirm the behaviors that I'm going to commit to and focus my energies on those before the call. And while I'm on the call, I'm going to keep bringing myself back, gently back to the behaviors that I want to affirm and use in that Zoom call. The behaviors I know that will be healthier for me. Like maintaining eye contact with the person I'm talking to. Also, I'll pay attention to my own energy. And if I'm starting to feel exhausted, I'm going to say to the person, you know, I'm feeling a little exhausted. I need a little break. I might take a walk, come back in a little while, so that I can bring my whole self to the conversation, both being a steward of my resources and wanting to be fully present to the person I'm in a conversation with. One more thing. I'm going to try not to multitask while I'm on a Zoom call. Now, I mean multitasking with like unrelated business things that I need to do. I figure if I were in a face-to-face conversation with someone, again, during coffee hour or really anywhere else, and I'm busy looking at my phone or writing down notes from a meeting while I'm with them, well, it wouldn't foster our connection with one another, our communication with one another. It certainly wouldn't foster any intimacy. If I want to continue to nurture connection and intimacy on Zoom, then I need to be fully present, just like a face-to-face conversation. It needs to be a priority. You know, in these conversations, I want to treat people with dignity and respect. And if I want to feel engaged, then I need to be engaged. These may sound like small things, like drops in an ocean, but my hope is that by making my interaction over Zoom a time of ritual and mindfulness, I'll feel less exhausted and discover more renewal during my interactions. I invite you to think about this, to consider how you might make your Zoom interactions more sustaining and spiritually nourishing for you. Perhaps you could start by reaching out to some of the members in this congregation over Zoom. Practice. Find out what that ritual, that mindfulness would be like with people who love and care about you, who want to support your personal and spiritual growth. Philosopher William James wrote, "We are like islands in the sea, separate on the surface, but connected in the deep." Maybe you've been feeling adrift, alone like an island, isolated in your own home. I know I've been feeling that way sometimes. But my friends, you are connected. We are connected. Look at that bowl of mingled water. Your water and the water from UU Miami. That's us. That's our congregation. We may be separate on the surface as we look across these electoral lines, but we are truly connected in the deep. And may this connection serve to strengthen you until we can share our physical space once more. So may it be.